Well, thank you all for coming. Couple of things. Now, I do see some familiar faces here. I like this to be interactive as much as possible, and this is one of those stories that's got a lot of moving parts, so feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, because if you don't understand, well, I haven't done a good job, so I have no problem with that, Also, if you're like me, if you think, well, I'll ask that question at the end, well, by the time the end comes, it's gone, so feel free. But we're here to talk about Klan activity in the area in the 1960s. The violence and ugliness of the civil rights struggle in the 1960s affected the Laurel area as it did other small towns during that era, and that extended up into Howard County. The Ku Klux Klan was very visible in this area during that time. This is the story of one very twisted, sick individual. There are parts of this story that are hard to hear, but it's important for historical purposes to hear what happened. Now, I pride myself on my research. This is one of those stories. I did research for probably 2 years before I actually wrote it up. So to show you, this is my research binder on this story. And this has news clippings, transcripts of my interviews, articles, anything I would find on the internet, photos, things like that. And along with this, I filed a FOIA request. And this is his FBI file. So I made sure I got it right. So just in case there's any doubt about that.
Did you get that from the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes. Yeah, I had to wait a year for it. Yeah. Okay, so local incidents were all led by Francis Raymond Edwards, who was a master at manipulating the media and garnering publicity for himself. During 1966 and 1967, it was difficult to keep up with the chaos behind his constant threats, boasts, lies, hoaxes, publicity stunts, and just generally bizarre behavior. He was responsible for numerous terror incidents in Laurel and other communities, but in the end, his narcissistic addiction to self-promotion led to his own downfall in the Klan. In addition to hundreds of media accounts, my research, as I just showed you, included Edwards' 250-plus page FBI file. The file contains descriptions of all sorts of activities and provides evidence of extensive surveillance and investigations of Edwards and the local Klan conducted by the FBI, Maryland State Police, Laurel Police, Howard County Police, and others. Edwards grew up in Connecticut. In 1957, he enlisted in the Army under an assumed name and served for 6 months before he was, quote, released from military control by virtue of the void enlistment. Somehow, in 1963, he re-enlisted under his real name and served for 11 months at Fort Meade until he was discharged, quote, by reason of unsuitability. Although Edwards was active in Klan recruiting in the Wheaton area since early 1966, little is known of his activities before he appeared on the FBI's radar. He began his non-stop self-promotion in May 1966 when he addressed a Klan meeting and a cross burning in Camp Springs and introduced himself as the exalted Cyclops of the Wheaton Clavern, the United Klans of America, known as the UKA. Now, whether or not it was an official promotion, his boasting did not please the secretive Klan, but he was just getting started. Whenever you see a clipping like this, that's directly from the FBI file, by the way. 3 days later, Edwards showed up at the Wheaton station of the Montgomery County Police Department to introduce himself as the exalted Cyclops and ask permission for the Klan to hold an open meeting and cross-burning in Rockville. Permission was denied. 1 month later, in June 1966, Edwards and other Klansmen paraded in front of the White House in a bizarre protest against 4 other Klansmen from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, who were planning to march to D.C. Let me say that again. He marched in protest of 4 other Klansmen. I didn't get that wrong. Yeah.
What
yeah.
didn't he like about it?
Well, he said Edwards told police the Gettysburg marchers had, this is his quote, no business acting to decide policies when there was another Maryland group so near to D.C. That night, same night, at a cross-burning in Camp Springs, an FBI informant reported that Edwards announced that his group was breaking away from the United Klan of America and that his new group would cooperate with the American Nazi Party. They would counter-picket any civil rights picketing in the Maryland suburbs. A reporter asked Edwards about civil rights picketers, and Edwards said, "If they start saying things, we'll use our fists," he said. Edwards' new group received the endorsement of the founder of the American Nazi Party. This new affiliation, according to the Baltimore Sun, was actively seeking racial bloodshed. Only a month after his grandstanding, the Klan had seen enough. The next day, June 13, Edwards was expelled from the Wheaton Clavern of the UKA. It wouldn't be the last time he was shunned by the Klan, but being free of the national organization seemed to energize Edwards. His self-promotion kicked into high gear. This is his gas station on Route 1 in North Laurel. It's now a mechanic's garage where they work on trucks and things. It's 1 block away from the Cake Corner, if you know where that is. That's the back of his gas station. At this point, Edwards, who went by the name Xavier Edwards, and his wife lived in the Maple Village Trailer Park on Route 1 near Savage, and he leased and operated a Phillips 66 gas station on Route 1 southbound in North Laurel. Laurel Police Chief Robert Kaiser told the FBI that his gas station became the headquarters for his Klan organization. 2 days after being expelled, Edwards led 8 Klansmen into D.C. in an unsuccessful protest of a voters' registration march in Mississippi. Quote, "The march was not completed as D.C. Metropolitan Police officers had to lead the Klansmen to safety after the crowd moved in on the marchers. An incident occurred which led to the detainment of a juvenile for spitting on one of the marchers. Edwards became concerned for the sake of the marchers due to the heckling of a growing crowd, and the Klan received a police escort back to the Maryland line." Edwards created constant media buzz and chaos. He learned very early on that all you got to do is say Klan, and of course the media is going to report on what you want it to say. So, at least weekly, and often more frequently than that, Edwards and his Klansmen were burning crosses or marching in Klan robes for publicity. It was on full display in July 1966 at a rally on the corner of Main Street and Route 1 southbound in front of the Patuxent Bank in Laurel. The news leader said, quote, "Exactly no spectators were evident 15 minutes before the scheduled start of the rally, and those few who congregated there after that apparently were attracted by the appearance of 8 or more reporters and photographers and the usual concentration of police manpower." For 30 minutes, Edwards tried to unsuccessfully rouse the passerby with racist rhetoric. He announced over his bullhorn that following the rally, the Klansmen would march to D.C. to, quote, "put down that black power." There was no mention of how they would do that. The lack of interest was noted by the news leader, which said, "By the end of the rally, perhaps 40 people could be counted on the sidewalks within sight of the satin-clad Klansmen, but some of the 40 were waiting for a bus." When the rally ended and the, quote, "march" began, Edwards and 2 of his Klansmen carrying an American flag started walking south on Route 1, escorted by police. The rest of the Klan members climbed into cars and followed. After a short distance, out of sight of Main Street, Edwards and the others got into the cars and rode the rest of the way to the D.C. line in Mount Rainier, the site of their next rally. At Mount Rainier, Edwards met his match, 2 white housewives. According to the Washington Post, during his racist rant over the bullhorn, Mrs. Carol Carrazza said, "Say that down at 14th and U." She and her friend, Carolyn Banks, then took the bullhorn from Edwards and began singing, "We Shall Overcome." Insults flew between the housewives and the Klan until Mrs. Banks slapped Edwards on the arm. "Assault," Edwards shouted. "I want a warrant." Then Mrs. Carrazza hit Alton Shelton, who said he was the imperial chaplain of the Klan. "Hey, she tore my robe," Shelton whined. "Arrest her too," said Edwards. Here's Edwards on the left and Shelton leaving the Hydesville station of the PG County Police after filing charges against the housewives for assault. And here are the housewives that assaulted them. The housewives, along with Mrs. Banks' 4-year-old son, were booked for disorderly conduct and released on $100 bond. Yes?
Now, this is the Klan in Maryland, right? Was it otherwise a vacuum?
No. Thank you for asking that. Let me clarify that. This guy Edwards had his own little group. There were other clans in Maryland, and they didn't want anything to do with him. So it's, it's all very dicey trying to piece that together, but this much I do know.
Were the other clans organized under a more national banner?
Yes, I'll get to that in a minute, but yes. Make no mistake about it, he was on his own, and he had his own little merry band of men that followed him and did what he wanted. Yes?
Because of the acoustics in this room, when folks ask you a question, can you repeat the question back to make sure everybody...
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just we said, I heard the question last time, but you said yes, and for
Okay.
in situations where that doesn't tell me. So, thank you.
Okay. Anyway, so those are the housewives. 2 weeks later, Edwards pulled another bizarre stunt, presumably for the attention. A Klansman reported Edwards missing to the Maryland State Police because he failed to appear at a Klan meeting. The Coast Guard called Howard County Police and reported that Edwards had gone out in the Chesapeake Bay from Deal the preceding day, and by 7:30 the following morning had failed to return. His vehicle was located at Deal. Police from Howard and Anne Arundel counties, as well as the Coast Guard, were searching for him. Then, without explanation, a week later, his wife reported that he had returned safely. Now, just prior to embarking on their 1966 U.S. tour, John Lennon's comments to a British interviewer stoked a firestorm for the group. Lennon spent much time trying to explain and apologizing for saying that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus Christ. The National Klan declared the Beatles were brainwashed by the Communist Party and criticized them for supporting civil rights. Bonfires fed with Beatles albums and memorabilia were held across the country. Xavier Edwards saw his chance for maximum exposure. Prior to the Beatles concert at D.C., which was later RFK Stadium, he gave an on-camera interview in front of the stadium.
The Beatles made a statement in all the newspapers that they're getting better than Jesus himself, and the Ku Klux Klan, being a religious order, is going to come out here the night that they appear at the Coliseum here, and we're going to demonstrate with different ways and tactics to stop this performance. The Klan is going to come out here because we're the only organization that will come out and make a stop to these accusations. This is nothing but blasphemy, and we're going to try to stop it any terror way we can, but it's going to stop. We're known as a terror organization. I think we have
terror organization.
We have ways and means to stop this if this is going to be the case. Yes.
What ways and means?
Well, I don't want to say this, but there'll be a lot of surprises Monday night, I believe, when they get here.
Once again, his threats and boasts amounted to nothing, but he got a major dose of publicity. Edwards and some Klansmen paraded outside the stadium before the concert. The Beatles' road manager said, quote, "It turned out to be 6 guys in white sheets and conical hats walking around with a placard. It didn't really amount to much."
Excuse me, did he call for the press conference? How did he get the press there?
Anybody in the Klan that wants to get attention, you call up the station, they'll come interview you. That's what I mean. He was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He was not a really smart guy, but he realized very early on that if he dressed up in his robes or if he said he was with the Klan, the media would come running, give him all the attention he wanted. The chaos around Edwards continued for the rest of 1966. The FBI interviewed him in October. Edwards told the agents that the, quote, "main objective of the Interstate Klan," which is what he called his group, is to prevent integration of the white and black races by nonviolent means such as demonstrations and propaganda. He said his organization was against communist and left-wing groups. His organization, he stated, would cooperate with any right-wing groups opposing communism and that espoused Americanism. At the end of 1966, Edwards announced he was moving the headquarters of his organization to Main Street in Ellicott City, after naming Baltimore its target city for 1967. He never explains what any of this means, so, you know. He said he needed his own headquarters because the National Klan, quote, is not militant enough, and he called its members cream puffs. Once again, his boasting amounted to nothing. Although space was rented on Main Street, his gas station in North Laurel on Route 1 continued to be his headquarters, and he received plenty of publicity for the idea of moving into Ellicott City. Even with the FBI, he couldn't control his boasting and lying. Quote, at the time of the interview, this is from the FBI file, at the time of the interview, Edwards furnished information regarding an alleged plan of an unknown member of the UKA, that's that national organization, to blow up an unspecified Negro church in the Arlington, Virginia area between October 22, 1966 and November 12, 1966. He last furnished information regarding an alleged raid by members of the UKA of North Carolina on an apartment of a member of the Black Muslim, or one used by the organization, during which 500 rifles of unknown type were taken. The information was received from members of the IK, that's Edwards' organization, whom subject refused to name. No information was received indicating either of the two above allegations ever took place or were actually planned. In the fall of 1966, the Action Coordinating Committee to End Segregation in the Suburbs, or ACCESS, was very active in the D.C. area. Edwards almost always showed up at their demonstrations. At a fair housing demonstration in Mount Rainier, Edwards blocked the sidewalk. An ACCESS member protested that his group was nonviolent and wanted no trouble. Edwards held up his fist and said, "Do you see that? It's nonviolent too, but I'll use it." In November, Edwards and his Klan counter-demonstrated against ACCESS twice in Arlington. On November 6th, police kept the Klan across the street and away from the demonstrators, but eggs were thrown by the Klan, and Edwards crossed the street yelling for ACCESS to, quote, stop singing that communist song, we shall overcome. Things got heated, and an ACCESS member swore out a warrant against Edwards for swearing at him. At another November ACCESS demonstration, police served the warrant and discovered Edwards was carrying a tear gas pen. He was charged with carrying a concealed weapon. A few weeks later, both charges were dismissed. Also in November, Edwards discovered a new way to obtain maximum publicity and political endorsement. He gave an interview on WTOP endorsing George Mahoney for governor over Spiro Agnew. Edwards telegrammed Mahoney, quote, the Klan and all right-wing organizations and thousands of sympathizers stand behind you 100%. Mahoney, the loser of his previous 6 campaigns for either governor or Congress, opposed all fair housing legislation. Mahoney rejected the endorsement, calling the radio interview with Edwards a complete fraud designed to deceive the people of Maryland. In January 1967, Edwards staged an elaborate hoax for publicity. He met with Philip Jenkins, that's the guy in the middle with the hard hat, the director of Freedom International, a, quote, militantly anti-communist civil rights group. The white, bearded Jenkins was accompanied by 8 steel-helmeted black youths and 2 attack dogs. Jenkins supposedly asked to meet after Edwards bragged that the Klan was going to use the same methods in its Baltimore project as it used in the Deep South. Quote, I wanted to sway him from violence and inform him that the Baltimore Negro was different from the Southern Negro, Jenkins said. Incredibly, this meeting with a reporter present took place in front of the Laurel Police Department on Montgomery Street. That's the building right behind them. After Edwards did engage in friendly target practice with the group in a woods about 2 miles from the police station, which I assume is up by the Rocky Gorge Dam, in the book called The Communist Party in Maryland, author Vernon Peterson characterized Jenkins, the guy in the middle, as, quote, a deeply disturbed, self-proclaimed Nazi and anti-communist. In March, An informant told the FBI that at a meeting of the Maryland Klan in Baltimore, Vernon Naymaster, the great titan of Maryland, warned the membership against Xavier Edwards and stated that Edwards is a nut and felt that eventually Edwards would wind up in jail. For 3 days in March 1967, Edwards' complement of lies, boasts, hoaxes, and bizarre behavior was on full display. An informant told the FBI that Edwards talked of confusing police and the press. Over the Easter weekend, 3 crosses were burned in Laurel. One on Main Street in front of Hank's Billiards, another near the Carver Memorial Cemetery along Route 1 near Beltsville, and the third at an abandoned gas station a few doors from Edwards' Phillips 66 gas station on Route 1. An unlighted 4th cross was discovered in front of St. Mark's Methodist Church in the Grove, Laurel's historic black community. A package of matches was found nearby, according to Laurel police. The next day, Edwards proved himself to be a master of misdirection and creating chaos. He called the Associated Press at 4 a.m. when he announced his resignation as head of the Interstate Klan, which was his organization. Quote, Edwards blamed what he called harassment from police and the press for his resignation, said the AP. He also added that, quote, he feared the Interstate Knights would resort to violence in the future and that he did not want to be a party to such behavior. Yes?
So how did Edwards support himself?
His gas station. How did he support himself was the question. He leased that gas station. He didn't own it, but he leased it from Phillips 66. At 11 a.m., Laurel Mayor Merrill Harrison received a telegram from Edwards that said, Dear Sir, request appointment at 1 p.m. Monday to bring to your attention racial problems in Laurel. Xavier, he misspelled his own name, Xavier Edwards, Imperial Wizard, Interstate Klan. Mayor Harrison phoned Edwards and invited him to appear at that evening's city council meeting to be heard. He agreed to attend the meeting. Predictably, Edwards didn't show up. Chief Kaiser, however, told the FBI that 4 white males in a gold Dodge Dart did appear at Laurel with what appeared to be Klan robes in the back of the vehicle. These individuals were dressed in civilian clothes and alternated leaving the council meeting and returning. Edwards told the AP that 15 crosses were burned in the Laurel area over the weekend by Klansmen in an effort to get him to change his mind. When the reporter corrected him and said 3 crosses were burned, quote, Edwards said that the Laurel Police Department was of poor quality and did not know anything. Chief Kaiser is quoted as saying hogwash and noted the chief termed Edwards a publicity seeker. Kaiser told the FBI this was just another instance of Edwards' sensationalism and exaggeration. With all the attention he brought on himself, his actions on April 25, 1967 are hard to understand. At 2:30 a.m., witnesses observed Edwards stealing a movable oil rack filled with 50 quarts of motor oil from the Hardesty service station on Route 1 in Beltsville. Quote, Edwards took the oil to a Phillips 66 service station on Route 1, Laurel, which he reportedly operates, and broke open the movable container which contained the oil. On May 2nd, he was arrested at his gas station for grand larceny and released on $2,500 bail. Even with his trial date set for July 19th, Edwards saw no need to lay low. A week later, Howard County Police observed Edwards in his Klan robe burning a cross at his Phillips 66 station. Quote, inasmuch as Edwards burned the cross on his own private property, there was no violation of the law. On June 9th, for the second time, there was an arson fire at Hank's Billiards on Main Street. On June 17th, a simmering feud with a neighboring business boiled over with the potential for violence. A month earlier, John Morris, the owner of Allen's Townhouse Restaurant, which was located near the Phillips 66 station, refused to serve Edwards and 20 robed Klansmen. Now you might, if you've been around for a while, you might recognize that building. It's on Route 1, southbound. Now, it was a number of restaurants over the years. It was a Greek restaurant for a while. It was a beef something restaurant. Now it's like, I think, a warehouse for some steel company or something like that. But it's still there. The building's still there. This time, when Morris refused to serve 10 robed Klansmen, things got ugly. Howard County Police reported that after a man came into the restaurant on Saturday night and flashed a Klan card, Mr. Morris's son assembled about 25 of his friends who are University of Maryland students to guard the restaurant. Howard County Police told the FBI that these groups faced each other for approximately 2 hours, but no clash occurred between them. He believes that only a show of police force caused the clash to be averted. 3 days later, 7 carloads of Klansmen rode through Howard and Anne Arundel counties for about 2.5 hours, led by Xavier Edwards. Each car displayed a Confederate flag. Quote, "I don't know what they were trying to prove," said Sergeant R.O. Matthews of the Howard County Police. You would think that someone facing trial on grand larceny charges in a few weeks and being under surveillance by multiple police forces would watch his step. But on June 27th, Edwards broke into the New Yorker Inn, a motel on Route 1 in Waterloo, and stole an air conditioner. He was charged with breaking and entering and released on $11,000 bond. Incredibly, the worst of this story was yet to come.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Did he ever have any kind of court-ordered psychiatric examination?
I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. As the number of cross burnings and arsons in the area increased, the black community in Laurel was naturally on edge. It all exploded on the night of July 10th, 1967. 5 white men crept into the grove around at 1:30 a.m. They first splashed gasoline on the wall of St. Mark's Methodist Church, which is right there, and tried to set it on fire. But when the concrete block building wouldn't catch fire, they crossed the street and did the same to a house. Fortunately, the homeowner was still awake and heard some commotion. He was able to quickly extinguish the blaze and evacuate his family, including one handicapped person in a wheelchair. The homeowner told police he had seen a white man run from the side of the house and flee in a waiting car. The fire caused minor damage to the side of the house, but he could not identify the arsonists except that they were white. Grove residents gathered on the streets when word of the incident got around. More than 100 residents, some of them armed, poured into the streets. No shots were fired, but rocks were thrown at cars passing on Route 198. The crowd dispersed when ordered to do so by the Laurel Police Department. At daybreak, Laurel Police agreed with the Reverend John Evans, who was the pastor at St. Mark's, to set up a nighttime barricades into the grove for protection. Residents were free to come and go, but others had to have a legitimate reason for passing through the barricades. The entire 18-man Laurel Police Force patrolled the grove in shifts with assistance from Prince George's County and the Maryland State Police. Edwards tried to stir up more trouble by announcing that the Klan would march into the grove at midnight. The Grove citizens took to the streets when they heard about his boast, but Edwards' most recent run-in with the law gave him a convenient excuse to call off the march. Not that he needed an excuse. Later that day, he was indicted by a grand jury on the charges relating to his burglary of the New Yorker Inn and arrested. He was released the next morning on $10,000 bond.
He spent a lot of money on bonds.
He sure did.
And was he out on all of these bonds
Yep.
at the same time?
Yep, but I'm glad you asked that because I'm getting to that right now. The situation in Laurel was even a topic at Governor Spiro Agnew's press conference 2 days later. Agnew said he had, quote, been following the Laurel situation, but I haven't done anything about it because the mayor had it under control. Actually, he didn't. Detective J.D. Irvin of the Laurel Police Department was the lead investigator for the arson case. I interviewed Irvin about the events. The pressure on Irvin to make an arrest was compounded by statements such as the one by Agnew, as well as Laurel Mayor Merrill Harrison, who tried to convince the community that an arrest was imminent. According to Irvin, initially they had few leads, but excellent police work panned out. The police suspected Edwards was involved, given his history, but couldn't establish a link. They eventually zeroed in on 4 Laurel area men and a 17-year-old. Irvin recalled that when he brought one of them in for questioning, it didn't take long for the suspect to admit what the group did. The story that unfolded during questioning was that the 5 arsonists had visited Edwards earlier that evening at his gas station with the intention of joining the Klan. Quote, Edwards told them they would have to burn something as an initiation, said Irvin. But since the church wouldn't burn, they turned to the house across the street. All 5 were arrested over the weekend following the arson. The suspects, all signed statements confirming the visit to Edwards. Even with the statements, Prince George's County State's Attorney announced that, quote, there is not sufficient evidence at this time to arrest Edwards in connection with the arson. Even so, Edwards fled the state in case they changed their mind. Remember this, that he fled the state. This is going to be a key thing later.
There goes his bond money.
Oh, yeah, probably a good point, you know. Yeah, I don't know how that works, but that sounds right. Yeah. He said, well, there goes his bond money if he fled the state. And that's probably a really good point. I don't know, but that makes sense. The nightly blockades and police presence had continued during the investigation, but ceased after 8 nights. The circuit court judge praised the work of Irvin and the LPD. He said, I can't conceive of a case where police officers could have done a better or more thorough job. They are to be commended. Eventually, all 5 of the suspects, but not Edwards, were convicted of arson and sent to prison. Irvin added another interesting detail to me. One of the arsonists sent him a Christmas card from prison for years. When Edwards fled the state to avoid arrest, his other legal troubles were compounded. On July 19th, the day after the blockades came down, his trial for grand larceny and receiving stolen goods for stealing an oil rack in Beltsville began in Prince George's Circuit Court. When the Prince George's County Court convened without Edwards, both of his court-appointed lawyers asked to withdraw from the case. The judge denied the motions. Edwards' bond was revoked and an arrest warrant issued. He was also still free on the bond for the Howard County burglary. I don't know if any of this is making sense, but like I said at the beginning, it's really hard to keep up. After 2 weeks on the run, Edwards called the FBI to arrange his surrender. When they arrested him at a gas station in Beltsville, he claimed his life was in danger. On the same day, a PG County grand jury indicted the 4 adults in the Grove arson case. Edwards pleaded guilty to receiving stolen goods from the Beltsville gas station. At 4 a.m., the morning of August 13th, Edwards called the FBI, quote, concerning an urgent matter involving someone possibly being killed. He related to the agent a long, complicated story about a friend from Laurel who woke up to his bed on fire and claimed to know who did it. The FBI did not even follow up on this one. The long list of lies, hoaxes, and bizarre behavior was catching up to Edwards. Both law enforcement and the media seemed to be growing tired of his antics. He was getting desperate in his continuing attempts for publicity. The next day, Edwards made a shocking announcement. He had inducted a black man into the Klan. There was to be a photo op in Mount Rainier. Edwards planned to introduce Jack Carter from Berkeley, California as the new member. However, according to an FBI informant, the black man was actually Robert Elliott from Washington, D.C., whom Edwards knew from his previous job at a printing plant. Edwards told the informant that Elliott was not inducted into the Klan and never will be. Edwards hired Elliott to pose for pictures with him and pretend to have been inducted. He was to receive a $20 payment for this, but as no members of the press showed up, Elliott was paid $5 and sent home. Here you go. With his sentencing in the PG case pending and his trial for burglary in Howard County looming, the Howard County State's Attorney provided him some unwanted publicity. He asked the judge to send Edwards to a state hospital for mental observation. Quote, there are reasonable grounds to believe that Edwards may be insane, said the state's attorney. He claimed Edwards may be of such mental incapacity that he cannot conduct his own defense. If the order was upheld, Edwards would be sent to Clifton T. Perkins State Mental Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. There was some irony in this. If Edwards is sent to Perkins, his case will be under the direction of Dr. John Hamilton, who has the final say in all mental evaluations for the court. Dr. Hamilton was black. On September 25th, Edwards was sentenced to 18 months in Prince George's County for his guilty plea to illegally possessing stolen goods. But the judge suspended the sentence after Edwards promised to disassociate himself from the Klan. What one has to do with the other is beyond me, but that was the ruling. At the same time, an informant told the FBI that Edwards, quote, is having trouble keeping a following and is having financial trouble. He also added that, quote, most of the members of the Klan are generally fed up with Edwards due to his publicity stunts. All the former members of the Klan that he knew were completely disenchanted with Edwards.
That makes sense in a lot of ways, because if you think about it, that's $30,000 worth of bond at a time when $30,000 was a lot of money. And where did he get it? I can see people being...
Yeah, I'm sure he borrowed a lot of it from
probably
these
never paid it back.
followers. So, yeah. On October 6th, the judge in Howard County dismissed the petition to compel Edwards to undergo a mental exam. The judge ruled that, quote, the state doesn't have the right to require a person to undergo examination for his competence prior to trial. Edwards' attorney told the Washington Post his client was, quote, as lucid as daylight itself. Edwards' Klan days appeared to be over. By November 1967, informants and police reported, quote, that Edwards has almost completely forsaken all his old associates and most of those who had been contacted in the recent past he had alienated by borrowing money and not paying it back, and that he has made no efforts in the Maryland area to reorganize his Klan. Edwards did indeed cease his Klan activities, but for the next year he was in trouble and on the run for numerous schemes to pass bad checks. One incident during this time in particular stood out. During the 2 months in 1968 when James Earl Ray avoided capture after being identified as a suspect in Martin Luther King's assassination, Arlington County detectives received information that Ray Williamson, a maintenance man at an apartment complex, resembled James Earl Ray. In calling at the apartments, detectives were observed and the suspect fled. Investigation disclosed Williamson to be Edwards and not Ray. Edwards served prison time until his parole in 1974. In possibly the worst rebuke it could have given to the former insatiable publicity hound, the FBI in 1977 declared that Edwards was, quote, no longer of interest to them. Now, as I said, I wrote for the Laurel Leader for 10 years, and that's where this article appeared. It was a 2-part series. It was one of the longest I've ever written, as you know, I showed you all the research. But there's an after story here, which is pretty bizarre. So the articles rather appeared in 2018. And about a year and a half later, I got an email from a guy in England who said he was Edwards' son. And he said he's been trying to contact him, and would I help him? Well, I knew exactly where Edwards lived. I knew his address. I knew his phone number, but I responded to anything. I tried to contact him. Well, as a journalist, and especially when something like this appears, I'm sure you can imagine, I get a lot of really bizarre and sometimes threatening, comments and emails and all this kind of stuff. But this was out of nowhere. So I thought about it, and I got back to this guy. His name was Paul. And I said, look, I don't know how you can do this, but you have to prove to me you are who you say you are. And if you can do that, I'll help you, because I know where he lives. He sent me scans of his passport, his birth certificate. I was like, oh, okay, this is legit. His name was Paul Edwards. So we went on a couple of Zoom calls. He's lived in England his whole life. Really, really nice guy. But I couldn't for the life of me figure out how he could be Edward's son. So during our conversations, he said to me, well, his mother in the 60s had spent 2 summers in Connecticut as a nanny. When Edwards fled the state, if you remember I said at the beginning, he's from Connecticut. and it's in his FBI file. I didn't put in the article. There wasn't enough room for everything. He went back to Connecticut, and apparently he took up with this nanny. And so she, pregnant with Paul, went back to England. And Paul told me that whenever he would ask questions about his father, they would say to him, well, you know, they wouldn't talk about it. But he had some bare bones information. He knew his name, he knew he was from Maryland, that kind of thing. And then he saw my article on the internet, and that's when he contacted me. So I asked Paul, I said, look, please, and they made arrangements. So Paul wrote to Xavier, and he wrote back. And they made arrangements for them, Paul and his wife, to come to America and go see him. So I said to Paul, please, the only thing you owe me is we need to talk after you see him. I have got to talk to you. So we met. Laurel History Boys, we used to meet at the Laurel Diner all the time, and that's where this is. You can see we have our little logo on our table there, so you know. But that's Paul and his wife, and I can't for the life of me remember his wife's name, but she was so funny. She was a really nice person. And so they met us there when they were on their way to the airport to fly home. And he sat down, and I was jumping out of my skin. I couldn't wait to hear what this guy said. And I said to him, so what happened, or how'd it go, or something like that. And please excuse my language, but I'm going to quote Paul exactly. Paul said, I said, well, he didn't go into detail about what made him say that. But he did tell me that over the course of 2 days, he said, Xavier is now a born-again Christian. He said Paul discovered that he has 2 half-sisters that he never even knew existed. Xavier was remarried, and he said over 2 days he never once mentioned his past, he never once mentioned the Klan, he never once mentioned all the stuff that Paul wanted to know about, but he didn't bring up. He said, I'll let this guy bring it up, but he never did. So I said to Paul, would you be mind if I wrote about this? Because, you know, this is a kind of a cool epilogue to what I did. And he said, no, I'd rather you didn't. Because he says, I just discovered I have 2 half-sisters, and I want to try to, you know, maybe start a relationship with them. So I said, okay, fine. I'll agree to that. So, but how bizarre is that? So while I'm taking questions, I will leave this up here. The books are up here if you want to check them out on your way out. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Is he still alive?
No. The other thing Paul discovered was that he had cancer, and he died. When I saw Paul, that was probably 2019, so he probably died about 2022. Xavier did. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What's the significance of the burning process? What does it mean?
I have no idea. I mean, does anybody know the answer to that? I don't know. I mean, it's their symbol, but I don't know.
It actually it wasn't an original piece of symbology from the Klan. It was something they actually picked up from that silent film, Birth of a Nation. It was back in 1915. And in that, this fictional version of the Klan burned a cross in the movie. And that movie actually, and the fact that it was really popular, kind of jump-started a new iteration of the Klan, which went on in the 20s, and was pop. You know, the Klan was branched all over the country. Politicians used to speak to them, and prominent citizens, white citizens, were in the Klan. But it was at that point that the cross burnings became a thing. They just picked
So the Klan.
but they didn't do cross burnings.
I didn't know that. Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, how is this symbolic of what the rest of the Klan was doing in Howard County at that point?
She wants to know how this relates and symbolic to the rest of the Klan. The difference is Edwards was a publicity hound. The Klan didn't like publicity. I mean, they only wanted to be seen when they were doing something, some sort of terrorism act. You know, they covered their faces. They didn't want people to know who they were. This guy was all about, he was such a narcissist. It was all about him. And he just obviously he was a racist, but he hooked up with this organization that gave him carte blanche with the media. And he realized that, even though he was not a smart guy, but he realized that right away. And he used it to the fullest extent. But that's why the Klan kicked him out, because they didn't want this kind of
Was
publicity.
there much terrorism that took place in the 60s then by the rest of the?
Well, he was responsible for everything around Laurel, and the only terrorism were everything that I talked about.
Right, yes.
But yet, as you were saying, there were other clans.
Right,
It was a very splintered, as far as I can tell, a very splintered organization. There were all these different clan groups, and how unified they were, I have no idea. My research only concentrated on this guy, so.
Yeah, I was just wondering in terms of, this was the time when George Wallace was running for
Right,
president. and
right.
There was a lot of obviously civil rights activity, civil rights violence going on, and I don't know whether the Klan in Maryland was involved with that, but there were national issues, and this guy was all
Right,
little local nonsense.
right, right. Yeah, speaking of George Wallace, so I was there when Wallace was shot at the Laurel Shopping Center. It was my senior year of high school. And half the school was there. We weren't supposed to be there, but how often does something like that happen, you know? And we were all a bunch of long hairs. We were all jeering and heckling him. But that was something I'll never forget. I mean, I've done presentations on that too. It's just indicative of the violence, you know, that happened around the country at that time. Yes, sir.
How many were in Xavier's group?
It was a small group. I don't have an exact number, but from what I gleaned from his FBI file, at best, it was maybe a dozen. But it was usually smaller than, and they would come and go.
You said there were 21 in the restaurants?
Yes, yeah, I think, I don't know that they were all Klansmen. There were 10 of them in rows.
How about this, the FBI materials say what the estimates were for all these Klan groups?
No, because my file is about him.
Okay.
It's about him. You know, it's interesting with this FBI file. I've gotten FBI files on other things in the past, and they make such a big deal about redacting. I've got addresses in here. It's like whoever was supposed to redact this one was asleep that day. I mean, there's addresses, there's names, there's all kinds of information that I probably shouldn't have. But this is from the 60s, so who cares? Yes, sir.
When was that picture taken of the gas station with the KKK?
When he owned it. So it was probably in the early 70s, late 60s. That was the back of the station,
Oh, okay.
not the front, not the Route 1 side. No, that was the back, yeah.
And where is that building?
It's still there. It's been renovated. It's a garage for, you know, they work on trucks, and I don't know the name of it, but it's a block north of the K Corner,
Oh,
the pink building. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, I've seen some of those headlines where they're talking about the quote-unquote Negro section of Laurel is a reminder that there was redlining in Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that there was a quote black section of Laurel because they weren't allowed to live anywhere else. Obviously, the Fair Housing Act and things like that.
Right.
Eventually,
Right.
overturned that, but that's why there was a section, because they weren't allowed to live anywhere else in Laurel.
Are you all familiar with the Grove? The Grove was started after the Civil War by freed slaves, and many of them worked at Montpelier Mansion. That was the beginnings of it.
Where is the?
You know where the new Laurel Library is? Right on Route 198 through Laurel? It's right behind that. I don't know, it's about a 4 or 5 block square.
Is that a neighborhood?
Yes, it's a neighborhood. It's not an official name. It was originally a grove of, I think, oak trees, which is why they called it the Grove. Yes, sir.
Was the Klan pretty active in Maryland in general? Because
Yes.
Whenever we would drive to Emmitsburg, we'd pass a restaurant on the left side called the Shamrock.
Mm-hmm.
And people could tell me that they used to meet there all the time.
He asked, was the Klan very active in the state of Maryland overall? And the answer is absolutely. There were pockets. Savage was a big hotbed of Klan activity for many years. Camp Springs, I mentioned them a few times. They used to have cross burnings down there all the time. So yes, yes. And as I said to him, there were all these groups, and how they were connected, you know, who knows? I don't know that they knew. So they all wanted to do their own thing. Yes, ma'am.
In your research, did you come across any of the
I did. I talked to a number of residents in the Grove. There's a woman down there, she's since passed away. Her name is Mildred Awkward, and when I talked to her, Mildred, she was, I think, 90. I went to high school with two of her sons, and she told me the stories about how the men in the Grove, in the neighborhood, would go arm themselves when, you know, they thought the Klan was coming. And yeah, it was just so ugly, you know. And it was all because this guy couldn't keep his mouth shut. You know, there was never anything behind, I'm not talking about any other Klan, but there was never anything behind his actions. He was just a big mouth looking for publicity. Yes, ma'am.
So what about his background?
I couldn't find hardly anything about him other than he came from Connecticut. He grew up there. No idea. No idea. I don't even know how far he got in school. I would not be surprised if he was a dropout. I don't think he was a very smart guy. I mean, you know, come on, look at the stuff he did. You know, like stealing air conditioners and oil and stuff. You know, when he knows that he's being watched. I mean, you know, I don't know. Yes, sir.
I just looked into Wikipedia about burning crosses. It apparently started as a Scottish thing, a call to the Scottish clans to war in around 1812 and things, way back.
But in America, I guess they put it in the movie and it took off.
Yeah. And that.
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Had to do with the Scottish clans.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Where was the office moved to in Ellicott City?
It never was.
It never did come there?
No. It got a lot of publicity for saying he was going to, but it never went anywhere. He was in his gas station the whole time.
Was there a place that did that, or you know?
They said, the article that I found said that he had rented space, but they didn't say where. But he never moved. He never came to Ellicott City. But he got the publicity that he wanted, so. And that was what it was all about. Yes, sir.
I did notice on one of your slides there, the tag for Ellicott City was ELLOCO.
Wasn't my newspaper.
No.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
Do you have any documented activity of the Klan in Howard County?
Any documented what?
Klan activity in the 1960s here in Howard County? Any large rallies?
He wanted to know, do I have any documented Klan activity in Howard County, right, in the 60s? All I have is what pertained to him. Because like I said, they're very narrow with these FOIA requests. So I'm sure they have a whole library of stuff about the Klan, but I asked for him, so that's what they gave me. And that was enough, you know. Yes, ma'am.
On adding that, I guess, I grew up in this area and never heard anything about any of this. But back in the 90s, I was subbing at high schools here, and I was with two students. They were special ed, and one of them started telling the other one about this wonderful KKK camp he was going to. And it was just lovely, and they just did camping. So he's telling this to a black kid, and it just freaked me out because I thought, first of all, I had no idea what he was dealing with. And second of all, the fact that it was all kind of underground and quiet. And the camp, I think, was in an adjoining county. But this was in the 90s, and I'm thinking, so there's stuff, you know, we just don't know about.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Other than just hearing about himself, did you find any evidence of like him trying to harness this? Like, why did he want the publicity? Did he try to use it to like make a name for himself with other parts of the Klan, or to like get himself into something? Or
No, he was just a narcissist. He just loved the attention. You know, I mean, that became loud and clear to me as I did older.
Like, and come to my gas station.
Nope.
So just,
No. I talked to somebody, I don't remember who this was, who said that a few years after, I guess he went to jail or something, and the gas station changed hands a few times, and somebody said that they were there when somebody pulled up to get gas. Said, "Is this the Klan gas station?" So, you know. Anything else? All right, thank you all.